What's up, addicts? Welcome to the Fantasy Addiction Network. We are continuing our trade report Dynasty series by division. This video, we're going over the AFC East, going over all the fantasy relevant players and see where their trade value lies post NFL draft. But as always, if you guys find this video helpful, please hit that like and subscribe button, and let's not waste any more time. Alright guys, so going again through division by division, looking at the increase or decrease in value of fantasy relevant players by team. We'll begin this video by looking at the Buffalo Bills. Now, they did a few things in free agency, but not really all that. There's only a couple impactful moves that they made. Obviously, the biggest one, adding Stephon Diggs, trying to give Josh Allen a true receiving threat there, and they let Frank Gore go. Really, from an offensive standpoint, that's all that can really be said. They didn't really do too much. They kept the continuity of their offensive line, which was pretty decent last year, so that's good news. And then in the draft, they got Zach Moss. In the third round, they drafted Gabriel Davis as another receiver there out of UCF. Jake Fromm in the fifth round, Isaiah Hodgins. So no one really high caliber other than maybe Zach Moss in terms of the draft. So this is going to be a pretty similar offense to what we saw in the prior year. Now, what does that mean for trade value? So for Josh Allen, I guess you could say it brings his value up slightly, but I do have some concerns about his longevity in the NFL. Maybe I'm basing it too much off of that playoff game versus the Houston Texans, but I think Josh Allen showed us that he might not actually have the confidence or the capability to actually succeed in the NFL, and we've seen enough of errant throws and bad decision making over the course of the past couple of years that he's kind of made up for the fact that he plays on a team with good defense and that he can run the ball pretty well. So maybe his flaws will be able to continue to be masked by the things that he does well. But this year will kind of expose him if he isn't able to succeed with a threat like Stephon Diggs there. Now, in terms of dynasty value, like I said, it's pretty much about the same, maybe up slightly. So he's still going to end up coming there as a top 10 quarterback just because of the value that he gives you running the ball. But I would not be afraid to put him on the market and see what you can get for him, especially in a super flex league. Okay, jumping to the running back. So Devin Singletary, unfortunately, if you guys held him through the draft, his value went down pretty considerably after the draft. There were some rumblings in free agency that the Bills were looking to sign a guy like Melvin Gordon, so hopefully that gave you the signal to pivot off of Singletary. But now that they have Zach Moss, with Zach Moss there and Josh Allen, who loves to run the ball in the end zone, it's very hard to see a world where Devin Singletary is getting a lot of red zone carries. Should still be somewhat valuable based on his ability to attack in the passing game, but having Zach Moss there is really just going to turn this into an ugly two-headed committee, and I wouldn't be very happy if I had Devin Singletary right now. So if you're still able to sell him to someone that thinks highly of him, I'd still try to get out now before we see the ugly reality of what this backfield looks like. Zach Moss is going to be an interesting guy being drafted in late second, early third round of rookie drafts. I mean, he'll be a serviceable asset. I just don't see a lot of upside there, especially with the way that this team likes to spread the ball between two backs. Now for Stephon Diggs, I think his value is actually very inflated right now. We saw the Bills paid a high price for him. Stephon Diggs has a household name that in fantasy a lot of people pay attention to. Going to the Bills, I don't think is a very good fit for him. He went from a team that was run heavy, low pass volume, but had an accurate deep thrower, which is where Diggs made a lot of his big splash plays for fantasy. And he goes to a team that's also run heavy, low pass volume, but a quarterback that isn't even the top 32 in terms of his deep ball accuracy from 2019. So if Stephon Diggs was upset with the volume that he was receiving and the quarterback play of Kirk Cousins, I don't think he's going to be that much happier playing in Buffalo with Josh Allen. So this could turn into a pretty ugly situation pretty fast. John Brown definitely saw his volume go down with Stephon Diggs there, and he's going to lose some of the volume that gave him fantasy relevance last year. So both he and Cole Beasley are probably guys that if they're hanging around on your roster, you're just kind of lingering there to see how much Stephon Diggs is used. But Cole Beasley is probably a guy you can dump to the waiver wire. I'd still hold on to John Brown for a little bit. I think he's talented enough to still perform well well enough to be considered like a wide receiver 3. And then on the tight end side, Tyler Kroft is a bit of an unknown because he was hurt all of last year, so they did pay him a decent sum of money. But Dawson Knox showed promise, still very young at 23, so I would try to acquire Dawson Knox cheap right now. He's kind of an unknown name out there. If you're looking for upside at tight end, if you have some more established guys and you just want someone that could potentially break out, I think Dawson Knox is a good name there. All right, let's jump to the New England Patriots now. One of the more interesting teams, we'll just leave it at that. Adding Brian Hoyer and Damiere Byrd, a wide receiver from Arizona, and they got Adrian Phillips there as their safety, but they lost Tom Brady. They lost Philip Dorsett. They lost their center, Danny Shelton, Jamie Collins, Kyle Vanoy, and their kicker, Steven Gostkowski. So this offense took a pretty massive hit. Their draft really just focused on defense for the most part, drafting a safety, a linebacker, and an edge rusher with their first 3 picks, and then taking 2 tight ends. So they didn't really do anything to address the wide receiver position. They didn't do much to address the offensive line until later. So this can be I trust Bill Belichick, but man, this team looks like it's going to be in for a very, very rough year. Jarrett Stidham and Brian Hoyer are your current quarterbacks. Still looking like Jarrett Stidham is going to get the nod. I don't know how much fantasy value he has in the Superflex League. I mean, he's probably going to be a starting quarterback, but probably, bottom 3 is what we're expecting, unless he just turns out to be like this next guy that nobody knew. But we saw him play terribly last year. It was so bad that they had him come in and play a game near the end of a game that they were completely blowing a team out. He was immediately pulled after throwing a horrible interception, and Brady went back in. So I don't know. This could just be a tanking situation, but that doesn't strike me as the Patriots way. So I just don't believe in what this offense is doing. So I think the moral of the story here is everybody's value is down. Sony Michel's value is down. Not having Brady there anymore is going to make it hard for them to have as much space running the ball, because teams will be able to commit more to stopping the run, since they won't be as afraid of the quarterback throwing the ball without Brady there. James White way down, not knowing, you go from one of the better signal callers and being able to get the ball to running backs. James White was heavily reliant on that high pass volume that Brady provided. So James White, I mean, I wouldn't drop him, but he's almost a waiver candidate at this point. Damian Harris, who was drafted last year and barely got any looks. We'll see if he can start stealing any carries from Sony Michel, but probably not going to be someone you rely on unless there's significant changes to that depth chart. Julian Edelman is, probably one season away from retirement and now playing with an unknown at quarterback. If you can get anything for him, I would probably try to sell him. N'Keal Harry is probably the one guy on this team I'd try to buy low right now. This whole offense is so depressed, but he had a really, really good athletic profile that I would at least try to acquire him for cheap, because you don't know what next season will look like. The Patriots will eventually address that quarterback position, and N'Keal Harry is still very young early on in his career. Probably get him pretty cheap. Mohamed Sanu is probably someone you should dump to the waiver wire. And then Devin Asiasi and Dalton Keene, they're both drafted within a few picks of each other. From an athletic prospect, I like Devin Asiasi a little bit more, but they're both incredibly low value Dynasty assets right now. Probably someone I would rather trade for in a few years rather than let them rot on my roster for a while. They're probably not going to hold any value in fantasy in 2020. Okay, let's jump to the New York Jets. I'm actually decently interested in what this team did. So they acquired George Fant as a good tackle for them. I'm okay, I guess you should say. They got Frank Gore. That just happened today. Connor McGovern, center from Denver, who had a 71.9 PFF rating. And then they got Brashad Perriman to replace Robbie Anderson, who they lost. They also let Demaryius Thomas go. Ryan Khalil, who wasn't very good, tackle there, and then Kelvin Beachum. So moving the offensive line around a lot. And then their first pick, their premium pick in the first round, they get Mekhi Becton there. So really making heavy investments into their offensive line, which is good because they had one of the worst offensive lines last year. This is really good news for Sam Darnold and the run game there. They acquired Denzel Mims, one of the higher athletic rated prospects in this wide receiver class, a guy that compares very closely to Chris Godwin. And then they spent a lot more of their picks on the next couple picks on defense. They did acquire James Morgan from, I believe, Florida Atlantic, so don't really know much about him. I didn't scout him at all, but that was interesting seeing a quarterback go there before Fromm and Eason were off the board, and they grab a guard near the end of the draft. So I really think Sam Darnold is a buy low in Dynasty right now. It obviously depends on what people are selling him for, but especially in Superflex. He's still incredibly young, and he really hasn't had an opportunity to play with a big bodied receiver like we have with Denzel Mims. I think this is a very good opportunity for Sam Darnold to really show whether or not he can succeed in the NFL. And most likely, if this is another down year, this would be Adam Gase's last season, so we can expect the potential for an upswing in value for fantasy players on this team once Adam Gase is gone. Now, Le'Veon Bell is a very interesting name in Dynasty right now. His value is low, but he should be a target for win-now teams. So if you're in a situation where you just need one more running back to punch your ticket, and you think you have a strong enough roster to go to the Super Bowl and win it in your league, Le'Veon Bell should be on your short list of guys to target right now. He probably only has 1 or maybe 2 years of value left. But, I mean, even last year, he had a lot of volume. That team was just so atrociously bad. It was really hard for him to have too much fantasy value. Putting that much investment into the offensive line, getting Sam Darnold, a receiver like Denzel Mims, this offense has to take at least a little bit of a step forward. And Le'Veon Bell, even with Frank Gore there, Le'Veon Bell should be able to at least maintain a good portion of that volume. I mean, Frank Gore is 36. I don't know how much he has left in the tank. But yeah, if you have Le'Veon Bell and you're not in a win now moment, you should definitely try to sell him to someone who is. Try to get some future draft capital out of it. Rashad Perriman, his value is pretty low. Probably not worth carrying, but we'll see if he can end up becoming the wide receiver 2 there. Now, I think Jamison Crowder could be kind of like your poor man's version of Julian Edelman from last year. He was peppered with targets for a good portion of the year last year, and he plays a significantly different game than Rashad Perriman and Denzel Mims play. And then Denzel Mims, while in redraft leagues, not that interested, I do think this is a really good place for him to succeed because he can be the alpha of that offense. There's not really anyone else competing too heavily for that role. So as long as Sam Darnold and him can gel and have some time this offseason, look for him to make an immediate impact to this team. On the tight ends, Chris Herndon is still your ultimate tease. I don't really know how much longer he's going to stay on this team. They did extend Ryan Griffin, so it might be worth a stash, someone that you can acquire pretty cheap, kind of like Dawson Knox, that if you're looking for like a fourth tight end on your roster that at least has some upside and could potentially be used in a pinch, I think Ryan Griffin would be a decent add there. All right, let's jump to the last team, the Miami Dolphins. This team made some of the most moves in terms of obviously acquiring a lot of draft capital last year and then doing a lot of stuff in the free agency. They get Eric Flowers, a tackle from New York. They get Jordan Howard. They get Byron Jones, the cornerback out of Dallas. They get Shaq Lawson. They get Emmanuel Ogbah, and they get Kyle Van Noy. So they just completely retooled and reloaded their defense. They lost Charles Harris and Taco Charlton, who weren't very high ranked at their position, but they did lose Rashad Jones, who had been a cornerstone safety for them for a while. Now in the draft, obviously they made the biggest move for their team by taking Tua Tagovailoa as their quarterback with the 5th overall pick. They grabbed Austin Jackson to shore up that offensive line, which was pretty bad last year. They also grabbed Robert Hunt and Solomon Kinley later, a tackle and a guard. So they're doing a lot to improve this offensive line. I don't know if it will be enough to make it a good offensive line for this year, but it should be improved from last year when it was one of the worst in the league. They also traded for Matt Breida during the draft to give Jordan Howard a compliment. It's not going to be a fun situation for fantasy, but looking at both of those guys' value, Jordan Howard and Matt Breida, I think Matt Breida has the higher value in fantasy because he's more of your pass-targeted running back, and as we have learned through using various statistics and analysis. I believe it was, I can't remember, I think it was Scott Barrett that had tracked and analyzed that a target is worth 2.8 times more in fantasy points than a carry. So Matt Breida, although he might not lead the carries with Jordan Howard there, should be the main primary pass catching back, especially if Ryan Fitzpatrick plays this entire season. You know the Dolphins are going to be slinging the ball a lot, and I think Matt Breida will end up being a sneaky low-end running back too for a good portion of the season. That doesn't mean he carries a lot of value, but you can probably get him for pretty cheap right now. So if you need a little insurance, you don't want to pay up for your handcuff, but you would like a third or fourth running back to flip in and out on bye weeks and just have an injury insurance option, I think Matt Breida is a good fit there. Jordan Howard, maybe in your standard leagues, holds a little bit more value, but overall, I wouldn't really spend any money or spend any capital on trying to get Jordan Howard. Tua Tagovailoa definitely had a rise in his value. There was a lot of speculation as to whether or not that injury that he suffered this last year was going to hamper his draft stock and hamper his career. Now, obviously, it did hamper it a little bit because he's projected to go number 1 overall, but falling to 5 at least shows that there was enough confidence in his recovery to take him that early on. If he hits in the NFL, he's going to be a phenomenal athlete, someone that's going to be very good for fantasy. He had one of the highest passer ratings through his college career that we've ever seen, higher than even a lot of the prospects that we've seen come out in the last few years. So the ceiling is great for Tua, and he's definitely worth a decently high pick in Superflex. Our philosophy is a little different. Prefer running backs even in Superflex, but going in the back end of the first round in Superflex or even around 107, 108, it's not a bad move to stash Tua, because if he hits, he's going to be fantasy relevant for quite some time. Now, I think Devontae Parker and Preston Williams both see a value jump based on the fact that there was no replacement selected, even with the mountain of picks that the Dolphins had in a very heavy, talented wide receiver class. They felt very confident in Devontae Parker and Preston Williams as being their number 1 and 2 guys. So both of them see a value spike up. And the Mike Gesicki is very up, a name that might be a bit undersung in your leagues right now. So I'd be trying to buy any of those guys just on the chance that Tua could hit. Now, I do expect the Dolphins to at least try to keep Tua on the bench for some time until Ryan Fitzpatrick basically forces their hand. But Ryan Fitzpatrick has shown that he can at least sustain fantasy relevance, especially for a guy like Devontae Parker. He gave him his fantasy relevance. So I would at least want one piece in the receiving offense of the Dolphins, especially seeing that Tua could come on and be, one of the league's next elite passers. Having a piece in that offense already before that happens, this is a good buy low moment if you can get a Parker, a Williams, or a Gesicki. I would definitely prefer Parker, even though he's a little bit older, but Williams is probably a bit cheaper. And Mike Gesicki, it's going to depend on their owner, whether or not they are paying attention to how they were using him last year. But Clive Walford is gone now. Mike Gesicki is really the only tight end name in town, and I think he's going to have a pretty successful year. Should be pretty usable in fantasy. So if you need a tight end, you don't want to pay up for a more elite guy, Mike Gesicki should be someone that you'd be targeting. All right, that concludes our trade report on the AFC East. We'll continue going through all the divisions in our next videos. So if you like this content, please hit that subscribe button, and we will see you guys in the next video.